I woke up this morning with this weird flutter in my chest. You know that mix of excitement and nerves you get when something big is about to happen? That was me. 30 years. 30 years married to the same incredible woman. And today, we were throwing a party for it. Friends, family, laughter. I could almost hear it before it even started. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Coffee, rich and warm, filling the kitchen, mingling with the faint, sweet scent of roses my wife had arranged yesterday. She had this knack for making even the smallest moments feel special, even now, decades later. I leaned over the counter, inhaling deeply, and for a moment, it felt like time slowed down. I started setting the table, smoothing out the tablecloth, arranging the cutlery, just so. I imagined people arriving, their laughter bouncing off the walls, the clinking of glasses, the hum of happy chatter. It's funny how the mind can paint an entire scene in a few minutes, isn't it? And yet, as I laid down the last napkin, I couldn't help but smile. I had looked forward to this morning for weeks. A flash of memory hit me. Our wedding day. I could still see it, as clear as yesterday. The way her hand fit perfectly in mine when we walked down that aisle. The uncontrollable laughter when something silly happened during the ceremony. And that moment right after when we realized we were starting this life together. I had thought then that every anniversary would be just as full of joy, just as bright. Today felt like a little echo of that feeling. I glanced around the kitchen again, taking in the morning light spilling through the windows. It hit the table just right, making the polished silverware sparkle. The flowers caught the sunlight too, their petals glowing softly. I reached for my coffee, and the warmth seeping into my hands made me grin. There was this quiet thrill inside me, subtle but persistent, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. I could feel it in the tension of my shoulders, the small, excited taps of my fingers as I adjusted the napkins one last time. Today wasn't just another day. It was a celebration of decades, of memories, of love that had somehow endured everything life threw at us. And in that moment, I thought, maybe this day would be perfect. Maybe it would feel like every wedding anniversary we dreamed of, wrapped up in laughter, warmth, and the kind of contentment that comes from sharing a life with someone who truly knows you. As the morning wore on, a tiny knot of doubt started to form in my chest. At first, I tried to ignore it. Friends and family had been busy, I told myself. Maybe some would arrive a little late. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. But the quiet of the house started to feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I found myself checking my phone more often than usual. Every buzz made my heart leap, only to sink when it was a message from a store or a notification from the news, not from the people I expected. I kept telling myself it was silly. After 30 years of marriage, surely people would remember. Surely they'd want to celebrate with us. A memory crept in, uninvited but vivid. Birthdays from years ago, small celebrations where not everyone showed up. At the time, I had brushed it off with a laugh, said, "It's okay, we know who really cares." But now, in the bright morning light of our anniversary, that old sting felt strangely familiar. My stomach twisted as I wondered, what if history was repeating itself? My wife walked into the kitchen, humming softly. She caught me staring at my phone for the third time in 5 minutes and gave me a small, reassuring smile. "Relax," she said, though her voice carried the tiniest tremor. I nodded, tried to smile back, but even as I arranged the last of the flowers, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The clock ticked louder than usual, each minute stretching longer, each chime from the wall echoing off the quiet rooms. The smell of coffee lingered, but it no longer brought comfort. It only highlighted the emptiness around us. I could see my reflection in the polished silverware, a man trying to convince himself everything was fine when part of him already knew it might not be. I walked past the front door and peered out the window. The driveway was empty, the street calm, as if the world outside had forgotten today too. I felt that tiny seed of worry grow into a small, persistent ache. The house that had felt warm and full earlier now seemed slightly hollow. I tried to shake it off. "People get busy," I muttered under my breath. "It's just the morning, they'll come." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. The laughter I had imagined earlier seemed distant now, like an echo fading in a long, empty hall. And somewhere deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, what if today didn't turn out the way we dreamed? By mid-afternoon, the anticipation had started to feel less like excitement and more like a test. I kept walking around the house, adjusting chairs, straightening the tablecloth one more time, smoothing napkins that were already perfectly aligned. I tried to imagine the party as it should be. The clinking of glasses, laughter spilling from the living room, stories being shared across the table. But the room remained eerily silent. My wife floated around the kitchen with that quiet grace she always had, placing candles just so, rearranging flowers again for no reason other than perfection. We shared nervous smiles, but neither of us spoke. The thought that had begun to creep in. What if no one comes? I found myself rehearsing the small speech I had prepared, mumbling under my breath, testing different tones. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for supporting us, for sharing 30 years with us. The words felt strange coming from an empty room. The sound of my own voice bounced off the walls, a ghostly echo that made the quiet even heavier. Flashback hit me suddenly, like a photograph burning into my mind. Our daughter's 5th birthday. I remembered the rush of excitement when friends had arrived with balloons and gifts, the laughter of children filling every corner of the house, the pride and relief on my wife's face. That memory now contrasted sharply with today's quiet. Like the absence of color in a painting I had expected to be bright and vivid. I glanced at the clock. Each tick seemed slower than the last. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional bird outside, the distant murmur of traffic, felt amplified in the emptiness. I caught myself staring at the driveway, half expecting to see someone. Pulling in, a car door slamming, footsteps rushing to the front door. But no one came. I tried to distract myself, folding napkins into shapes, rearranging silverware, anything to keep the gnawing tension at bay. My wife moved beside me silently, handing me another cup of coffee. We shared that look, half hope, half fear. There was pride in what we had built in 30 years of shared life, but also the creeping sense that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as important to others as it was to us. The house, once filled with scents of roses and fresh coffee, now smelled like quiet. The walls seemed to close in, carrying the faint weight of our expectations. And as I adjusted a chair one last time and smoothed a napkin I didn't need to, I realized the waiting had started to feel unbearable. The party had officially begun, at least according to the clock. I stood near the front door, my hand hovering over the handle, expecting, hoping, that any moment now, laughter and voices would spill into the house. But the silence was deafening. I opened the door slowly. Nothing, just the quiet street. A few cars passing by, and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. It hit me then, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. The reality of it, no one had shown up. Not a single friend. Not even the neighbors we considered close. My wife stood beside me, her hand gently resting on my arm. She gave me that small, fragile smile she always had when she didn't want to hurt me with her own disappointment. I wanted to reach out, to tell her everything would be fine, but even my voice sounded weak in the empty hall. A flashback struck, sharp and bright. Our wedding day. The joy, the laughter, the crowd of family and friends gathered around us, celebrating the love we had promised each other. And here we were, 30 years later, in a living room full of untouched food and sparkling decorations, the echoes of that long-ago celebration haunting us. It was cruelly ironic, like life had decided to make a point. I walked slowly into the living room, my shoes making soft thuds against the floor. Every detail I had prepared for the party, flowers, candles, plates, glasses, seemed to mock me. The clinking of glasses I had imagined, the laughter I had rehearsed in my mind, the conversations I had looked forward to, all of it absent. The silence felt almost tangible, pressing against the walls, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. I could feel the sting of embarrassment creeping in. What would people think if they somehow walked by? That we had nothing worth celebrating? That after 30 years, our lives had become empty? I glanced at my wife again. Her eyes were soft, but I could see the glimmer of hurt hiding behind the calm exterior. She had always been the stronger one, the one who smiled when things were hard. But I could feel her disappointment as clearly as if it were my own. I sank into the nearest chair, taking in the room in a single, slow sweep. The table was pristine, the wine unopened, the cake untouched. I swallowed hard, trying to catch my breath, and for a moment, I felt a mix of disbelief and anger, like someone had pulled the rug out from under the celebration we had dreamed of for weeks. Life has this way of hitting you when you least expect it, doesn't it? And in that moment, standing in a room full of absence, I realized the party I had envisioned wasn't happening, not today. The weight of expectation, the ache of anticipation unfulfilled, and the stark reality of silence all came together in a way that made my chest tighten. I had expected joy, but instead, I was left staring at the quiet, wondering why it all felt so cruelly empty. We sat at the table in silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. The food we had lovingly prepared, plated and ready, sat untouched. The candles flickered faintly, their light reflecting off the polished silverware, casting shadows that seemed to stretch across the empty room. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the words caught in my throat. Anger started to bubble beneath the surface, sharp and bitter. I found myself blaming everyone. Friends who had promised they'd come, family members who had forgotten, or worse, didn't care enough to show up. Each imagined slight stung more than the last, a steady drip of disappointment filling the room. But then, the anger turned inward. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I hadn't reminded people enough. Maybe I had overestimated their interest. Maybe I had imagined this celebration mattered as much to them as it did to us. Flashback: our daughter's college graduation. I remembered the excitement, the congratulatory calls, the pride in my wife's eyes as we celebrated her milestone. We had felt surrounded by love, by people who shared in our joy. And now, here we were, 30 years married, and the room was empty. The contrast made my chest ache even more. My wife finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "It's okay," she said, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the tight grip on her hands. She was trying to shield me from her own disappointment, but it only made mine sharper. I wanted to tell her that yes, it was okay, but my voice cracked. My throat felt tight, heavy with unspoken frustration and hurt that I looked around the room again, really seeing it this time. The decorations, the carefully set table, the unopened bottle of wine, they all felt like symbols of neglect, not celebration. Each detail reminded me of effort unappreciated, anticipation betrayed. My mind raced, circling through every interaction over the past few weeks, questioning every call, every invitation, every laugh we had shared that might have been hollow. I felt a lump form in my throat, a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. How could people forget something so meaningful? 30 years. 30 years together, and no one seemed to care enough to mark the occasion. I clenched my fists, trying to swallow the rising tide of emotion, trying to convince myself that anger and blame could somehow fill the emptiness. But they only made it sharper, more present. My wife reached over and touched my hand. The warmth of her skin was grounding, a reminder that despite the hurt, despite the disappointment, we still had each other. And yet, the emptiness lingered, like a shadow over the day we had dreamed of celebrating. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused to come. Instead, I sat there, heart heavy, staring at the untouched plates, tasting bitterness instead of the sweetness of what should have been. Just as I began to sink further into the quiet, a sound at the door made me jump. A key turning, the faint squeak of the hinges. My heart leapt with cautious hope, only to see him, our son-in-law, standing there with a small, awkward smile. He was the only one who had come. The weight of disappointment lifted just slightly, replaced by a strange mix of relief and tension. "Hey, I, thought I'd drop by," he said, his voice hesitant, like he knew he was walking into something delicate. I nodded, trying to smile, but the gesture felt stiff, brittle. Relief and resentment tangled in my chest. On one hand, someone had come. On the other, it was a glaring reminder that everyone else had stayed away. I gestured for him to sit, and he shuffled in, taking in the empty room with wide eyes. The awkwardness hung thick in the air. Neither my wife nor I said anything immediately, just sat there, the three of us in the middle of a living room that was supposed to be filled with celebration. I could see the tension in his posture, the way he kept fidgeting with his hands, trying to find the right words, or perhaps the right excuse. Flashback: the first time I met him. I remembered his nervous laugh, the way he had tried to impress me, to show he cared for our daughter. At the time, there had been warmth, a glimmer of hope that he would become a real part of our family. Now, Seeing him here alone, that memory collided with the current awkwardness. It was comfort and frustration all at once that we started talking, cautiously at first. He asked how the day had been, how we were feeling. I could feel the gratitude rising in me. He had shown up, but it was complicated by the undercurrent of tension. Every polite apology he offered seemed to echo the absence of everyone else, a reminder that the party we had imagined wasn't happening. I caught my wife's eye across the table. She gave me a small, tight-lipped smile, the kind that said, "It's something, at least." And in that small gesture, I felt a flicker of warmth. We had our family, imperfect as it was, and maybe that had to be enough today. But even as we talked, a quiet unease lingered. The son-in-law's presence highlighted what was missing, the people who had promised to be there but weren't. My thoughts spiraled briefly, questions about loyalty, about who really cared, but I pushed them aside. For now, we had this moment, fragile though it was, and I clung to it. The day had taken an unexpected turn. From the depths of emptiness, a single presence offered relief, and yet it reminded me just how fragile joy could be. I sipped my coffee, slowly, feeling the warmth spread, and allowed myself a brief, cautious smile. It wasn't the celebration we had hoped for, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you could hope for. The conversation started quietly, almost politely, but it didn't take long before the tension became undeniable. I found myself voicing the thoughts I had been holding back all day, the disappointment and frustration that had been simmering under the surface. "I don't understand," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "We spent weeks planning this, and no one came." The son-in-law shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. I know, and I'm really sorry," he stammered. I tried to call a few people, but his voice trailed off, hesitant, defensive. I could feel my chest tighten, a mix of anger and sorrow rising in me. It wasn't really about him. It was about all of them, everyone who had failed to show up. But he was here, and he became the focal point of my frustration, a mirror reflecting everything that had gone wrong. Flashback. I remembered the last minor disagreement we had as a family, something trivial at the time, but still lingering in memory. I recalled my daughter's wedding, when the son-in-law had been patient, kind, and genuinely present. That memory softened my anger slightly, but only slightly. The disappointment today was too raw to ignore that I looked at my wife. She was sitting, quietly, her hands folded on the table, her expression calm but guarded. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who could hold her emotions in check when I was ready to explode. I could see her listening, absorbing everything, and it made me feel both guilty and grateful. The son-in-law finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. He explained that some invitations had been missed, that a few people had forgotten, that life had gotten in the way. His words were sincere, but the defensiveness lingered, subtle, like a shadow over the apology. I could see him struggling to navigate my disappointment without making it worse. I let out a long breath and leaned back in my chair, trying to calm the swirl of emotion inside me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, they all collided in a storm I hadn't expected. And yet, there was a strange relief too. At least we were talking, at least someone had shown up. The conversation was raw, honest, uncomfortable, and maybe that was exactly what we needed. We ended the discussion without resolving everything. The room was still quiet, but the tension had shifted slightly, like a storm passing over a field, leaving the air heavy but still breathable. I realized that love, family, and loyalty were complicated. They didn't always follow the rules we hoped for, and sometimes the people we counted on most could disappoint. But they could also surprise us, even if in small, imperfect ways. The son-in-law left later that evening. I felt a mixture of exhaustion and strange gratitude. We had faced the disappointment together, confronted the hurt, and, though imperfectly, found a thread of connection in the midst of absence. I sank back into my chair, heart still heavy, but a little lighter than before. After the son-in-law left, the house felt emptier than it had all day, if that was even possible. I sank into the chair across from my wife, staring at the untouched food, the flickering candles, and the silent room that had promised laughter and warmth but delivered nothing. The quiet pressed in on me, and for the first time all day, I let the weight of it all settle fully in my chest. That I remembered the 30 years we had shared, the highs, the lows, the countless moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but now felt like the foundation of our lives together. And yet, in this moment, surrounded by absence, even those memories were tinged with sorrow. I could feel the sting of being forgotten, of a milestone so important to us passing almost unnoticed by those we loved. Flashback. Our wedding anniversary 5 years ago. The house had been filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, friends and family crowding around, sharing stories and smiles. I remembered the joy, the pride, and the sense of being celebrated, and the contrast with today's emptiness made my chest ache. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of acknowledgement, of shared recognition for the life we had built. My wife reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady. I felt a wave of comfort in that small gesture, the reminder that despite everything, we had each other. Yet, even with that comfort, the heartbreak lingered. It was subtle but insistent, like a shadow at the edge of the light. I couldn't shake. The feeling of loss, of celebration denied, of joy postponed indefinitely. That I walked slowly around the room, letting my eyes linger on every detail. The flowers, which had looked so vibrant this morning, now drooped slightly, their petals softening with the passage of hours. The candles burned low, their flames casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts of the laughter that should have been. I breathed deeply, trying to ground myself in the sensory details, in the tangible reality of our home. Even if it was quiet and disappointing. In that stillness, I reflected on the nature of life and relationships. Love endures, even when recognition falters. Family can disappoint, yet still be worth cherishing. And sometimes, the moments that hurt the most are also the moments that teach us the deepest truths about resilience and connection. I felt a quiet sorrow, yes, but also a glimmer of understanding. Heartbreak, I realized, was not the end. It was a layer of depth added to the story of our life together. I sat back down across from my wife, letting the silence stretch between us, not uncomfortable this time, but reflective. Our hands intertwined, our eyes meeting in a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed and what we still had. The party had failed in its conventional sense, but in the silence, in the shared presence of just the two of us, there was something enduring, something real. As the evening settled in, we began to find a quiet rhythm together. The initial sting of disappointment hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, becoming a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. I realized that the party, the guests, the expectations, they were secondary to what truly mattered. My wife and I had each other, and in that simple truth, there was a fragile sort of peace that we started clearing the table slowly, moving together almost without speaking. Plates were stacked, glasses rinsed, candles extinguished one by one. The act of tidying up, small and mundane, became strangely comforting. It was as if by taking care of our space, we were taking care of ourselves, reclaiming some sense of normalcy after the emotional chaos of the day. Flashback. I thought back to ordinary mornings, Sunday breakfasts with our daughter, quiet walks, hand in hand with my wife, evenings spent reading side by side. Those moments, often overlooked at the time, suddenly felt like treasures. They reminded me that joy doesn't always come in grand gestures or loud celebrations. It often lives in these quiet, shared routines, in the small moments that persist even when the world lets you down. I poured us each a glass of wine and we sat together on the couch, letting the house settle into calm around us. I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing, the tightness in my chest loosening. We didn't need grand applause or validation from anyone else. This quiet evening, with the dim lights spilling across the room and our hands intertwined, was enough. I let myself smile softly, thinking about the absurdity of the day and the unexpected lessons it had brought. Life doesn't always follow the script you imagine. Friends forget, plans fail, milestones pass quietly, and yet, somehow, love endures. My wife's head rested lightly on my shoulder, and I realized that this endurance, this steadfast presence, was far more meaningful than any party. The air smelled faintly of roses and coffee lingering from earlier, the house warm and familiar despite the emptiness. I took a slow breath and let the quiet wash over me. The disappointment hadn't vanished, but it no longer dominated the room. Instead, there was a sense of healing, of acceptance, of rediscovering what really mattered. We had survived the day intact, together, and that was a victory in its own right. In the stillness, I found gratitude, not for the party we had imagined, but for the life we had built, for the love that had weathered 30 years, for the resilience that had carried us through disappointment and heartbreak alike. And I realized that recovery doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers quietly in the presence of someone who refuses to let go of you. By the time night settled over the house, the day felt like a long, strange journey. The empty chairs and untouched food were gone, replaced by quiet reflections and the subtle comfort of familiarity. My wife and I sat together in the living room, a single lamp casting warm light across the walls. There was no party, no applause, no bustling crowd, but there was us. And sometimes, that had to be enough. We poured 2 small glasses of wine, clinking them together softly. To 30 years, I said, my voice a little shaky, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything we had experienced together. She smiled, a soft, tender smile, and raised her glass. In that moment, the absence of everyone else faded, replaced by the presence of what truly mattered, each other. Flashback. I remembered a quiet anniversary long ago, years before the kids, when it was just the two of us. We had cooked a simple dinner, laughed over burnt vegetables, and danced barefoot in the kitchen. That memory now felt more alive than any grand celebration, because it was real, intimate, and entirely ours. I realized that today, despite the disappointment, had carried echoes of that same intimacy. The son-in-law's brief visit lingered in my mind, a reminder that small gestures can matter more than grand appearances. He had shown up, even if imperfectly, and in that, I saw a thread of connection that survived amidst absence. Life, I thought, was complicated like that. Disappointments mingled with small kindnesses, heartbreak with subtle moments of grace. I leaned back on the couch, feeling my wife's head lightly resting against my shoulder. The house was quiet, the hum of the night outside gentle through the windows. I let myself feel the mix of emotions, the sorrow for what didn't happen, the relief for what did, and the enduring love that had carried us through decades of highs and lows. It was bittersweet, yes, but real. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the warmth spread, and allowed myself a small, genuine smile. The world outside had let us down, but inside, we had each other. We had survived the day together, intact, connected, and reminded of the quiet resilience that had defined our life. 30 years wasn't just a number, it was a testament to enduring love, to facing life's unpredictability hand in hand, and finding meaning even when celebration didn't arrive the way we had imagined. And as the night deepened, with the soft glow of the lamp and the comfort of shared presence, I realized that this quiet, tender moment was a celebration in itself. Not the one we had planned, perhaps, but one far richer, far more intimate, and far more enduring than any party could ever have been.